a day and a half. So it's not just a brain dump of all the things that you know for doing operations with OpenStack. It's actually kind of a coherent book that hopefully makes sense. And you can download it if you go to that URL for free, or you can actually, if you're into dead trees, you can buy a copy of it for a really low price as well. And you don't even have to worry about copying down that URL. At the very end of the presentation, I've got a link, a URL to this presentation, so you'll be able to get all the content for it from Slideshow. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Give a bit of an introduction as to Rackspace and documentation and its importance. Talk about how developers actually discover an API, how I would go about discovering an API, web service API, cloud service APIs, what have you. You actually, once you discover that API, and you learn about it, and what makes good documentation, how do you create good documentation, and of course, what's bad documentation. It's really easy to do bad documentation. And kind of a special case is software development kits, and the importance of documentation to software development kits, and the importance of documentation of software development kits. Okay, so like I said, I'm from Rackspace. We're the open cloud company. We used to be a hosting company not so long ago. Say, 3-4 years ago, we were strictly dedicated hosting. We've successfully made a transition to a cloud company. So now we have these two pieces under our house. We have the dedicated side, experiencing hosting, earning the machines for you. And we also have the cloud side, the stuff you can spin up on demand via an API, which I'm going to be talking about with documentation. So, I mean, what is it? It's just infrastructure as a service. It's just infrastructure as an API. And no matter if your cloud platform is infrastructure as a service or platform, or probably most likely software as a service, the documentation matters to each and every single one of them for the API. And I've written an awful lot of code, an awful lot of APIs, and I often do remove those in order to show some of them. Okay, so maybe if you're not entirely familiar with APIs, that's application programming interfaces, this is where they actually live in relation to your cloud platform. So very important. It's pretty simple, really. Programmable web is static, and they discovered that API documentation is in fact the most important thing to developers. And if you pause to think about it for a second, it makes perfect sense. Because if that API isn't documented, you can't even use it. It might even exist, right? Because you have no idea how to call it, you have no idea how to you're guessing and there's no way to figure out actually how to use it. So API documents are really important to developers. And developers can make your platform. If you've got developers building solutions on your cloud platform, they're going to create a great ecosystem, a great spectrum of clients. Look at what all the third-party developers did for Twitter and blew it up. Likewise with Facebook and a lot of other services out there. Often, your API documentation is going to be a developer's first exposure to your service. They're going to get their impression of your service, of the quality of your service, and what it can be doing from your API documentation, because that's what they're looking for. That's what developers, that's their primary thing they're looking at, how to use your service. And so you want to get them on board as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, so they can be productive, and they can solve the problem that they need to solve, and move on to the next step. And of course, if you don't do these things, the developer is going to move, will probably look for that, and that ecosystem that you build on your API is going to crumble. Okay, so how do you actually go about discovering an API? There's no real magic to this. It's pretty simple. Developers, if they know your service, if you have a popular service, they might come to your homepage, your landing page, and they're going to scan that page for a few keywords like documentation or developer or API. Sometimes even support, maybe. It's pretty simple. And they're just looking for links, so they're looking for that, where to go and get information. Of course, if they don't know what they're looking for, they might find it via Google. And if they're really targeted, if they're really specific as to what they need, you might go on your API documentation first. So then it goes back to the first impressions, where if they see good documentation, they know you've got a good service. So Stack Overflow is a place where developers go to get help. It's kind of a Q&A type site. And if there's a solution they're looking for, and they're asking questions on Stack Overflow, other developers may recommend your service and say, oh, you know what, this Power Platform solves that problem. It's super easy. Here's a link to the API documentation. Here's the exact thing, a very specific method that you actually need to call from that web service. And boom, you'll get there right away. So again, your API documentation will be the first impression that you have on the phone. This is a pretty common scenario, standard that you see. Developers will often go to developer.apple.com, developer.people.com, and expect to get a site that they're catered to, where everything they need to know about developing on your cloud platform is pretty standard, really. And of course, I invite you to visit developer.rackspace.com. API.rackspace.com. So this is a little bit different. This is actually usually kind of the standard URL scheme for an API endpoint. And this is the URL that developers actually use to call your web service. That's the initial endpoint. But it's also a place sometimes where developers will go just to see what a browser response will get from the API endpoint. I often visit API endpoints in my browser just to see what it spits back. And sometimes I'll get some JSON, getting a 401 unauthorized. That's perfectly fine. It's perfectly expected. You should just be aware that in a sense, the response that you get back from those to that with the browser is also documentation. Ideally, you should point people to your documentation from a URL like that if they're trying to hit it with the browser. You can detect that they're coming in from the browser. Okay, so how do you go about learning an API? Of course, documentation, that's what we're here to talk about. That's pretty straightforward. Developers often expect free stuff. It's pretty common. They want a free trial so they can kick the tires and start to understand your service without actually having to shell out a bit of cash for it. And it's really in your best interest to provide them this free trial and let them kick the tires. And speaking of free trials, I also have some free trials to give away. There's $100 for 1 month. You should just come see me after this, and I'll gladly give you one. You need to think about what's the minimum amount of knowledge you need to learn in order to get started on your cloud platform. What's the bare minimum that they need to know? Authentication, kind of canonical thing that your service is really good at, saying starting a server, whatever it happens to be. What is the minimum amount of knowledge that they need to know to get going with your service? Trial and error. This is probably one of the most common ways that I test out a new web service. I start sending it requests and just to see what kind of responses I get. I'll authenticate and I'll start firing off requests, trying to work with the service and see what kind of responses I get back. Do those responses conform to the documentation, the documented responses? If I change things in weird ways, what embarrassment I get that? And just really money, trying to hear the dark tree, feel around the edges of that elephant and kind of wondering if you have a tree or a snake or what exactly it is you have. So what are some of the tools that I actually use to doing these kinds of trial and error things. Because all of these web services are talking over HTTP, that's the hypertext transfer protocol. I use a tool called Pearl that comes from the Unix world. It's also available in Linux and Mac, and you can even get it on Rackspace. This is a generic command line tool that allows you to send off HTTP requests. You can get the responses back. It allows you to send the headers and all the body content, basically the whole format of the message that you need to send to the cloud service in order to get information out of it or to tell it to do something. So it's just kind of a developer's toolkit. When you get responses back from the web service, typically in most modern APIs, they're coming back as JSON, that's JavaScript object notation. It's essentially just a script format that's coming back, that the information that you need is contained in. And sometimes you're really only interested in one particular piece of information in that text format, in that text file that's coming back to you. And you need a tool that understands the format and can extract the information that you need. And I personally use JQ. It's a tool I found on GitHub. Really clean syntax and really easy to work with on the command line, and I can just grab this information. So it's worthwhile to understand a tool that developers are using to access the cloud platform. And of course, at some point or another, you're going to need help. You're going to run into problems, and you're going to need more information and help from you. And you need to find a way to provide that to them easily and conveniently. And in the kinds of channels, they expect to see help. Okay, so let's take a minute to define what documentation is. The documentation must absolutely positively supply a getting started guide. It's absolutely necessary. It's 1, 2, 3. Here's what I need to do to get started with your service. It's often known also as a quick start guide or how to. Developers are going to scan your sites for words that you look at. Click on links so they can get going with your service. Navigation is really important to developers. You need to be able to get around the documentation easily without losing the context of what it is you're working with. So let's actually take a look at some examples. This here is Rackspace, the Rackspace documentation for our API. And I think we do a reasonably good job of navigation. You can see on the left-hand side here, we've got a basic tree hierarchy for navigation. One of the things I like about it is that when you click on one of the nodes there and expand it, and you leave the page and come back to it, you'll actually stay in that state. The navigation will stay in that state, so you get to retain that context when you visit the page. It's really convenient. Centric does a pretty good job of it as well. Pretty standard, really, of pen navigation. Disclaimer Center is a Rackspace customer. It's not fun. Navigate out or click on the level to move up the level. You use that in context of where you are. When you're writing code, context is everything. You're building up this stack in your mind as you're coding, and you get to pop things off and put them on. It's just core context switching, and that's a burden on the developers. Their crammed in this little narrow space and start wrapping that. Right? So even though the first few words are actually pretty relevant to you, the rest is just noise, and my eyes have trouble picking up exactly what it is I need when I get to the search results next. Nailed them. Again, disclaimer here, Nailed is a Rackspace property. Nailed does a really good job of search as well. when you put the search term into their box, you'll start getting results back. And you actually get the results back dynamically. So you get the first result before the second result is even there, and they just start loading dynamically one after the other. And as so often is the case, the information you're reading is going to be in that first, second, or third link. So you don't even have to wait for the whole thing to load in order to quickly jump the information you need. Stripe. This was my first experience with the Stripe documentation. They're sometimes held up as really good API documentation. And I was really surprised to find So I was surprised to find that the Stripe documentation didn't actually have any sort of search term. It's kind of weird, right? I think they're relying on the fact that you would use the browser find-in page, which is, I think, really inefficient with a search in this case. They have all the documentation on one page, and if you do a find-in page in your browser, you're going to get a ton of results. And if you've got a search term and then you search two terms actually need to appear right side by side. This is, I think, a terrible example of this. The documentation needs to provide really clear, full, concise examples. I don't like the way Rackspace does this. So they provide you with an example of a request. So that's kind of the raw request that you send out to Rackspace in order to get it to do something for you, to get information back. The trouble is, they only give you the request. There's a whole bunch of other information in there that you need to actually send it off. And it's blurry way up in the left-hand navigation under general API information. There's some information about how you can use it in curl. The trouble is, it's blurry way up there. And that's really not helpful. You need everything in one place so the developer can quickly and conveniently grab that out and paste it into his command line or browser or wherever and send it off to the Rackspace. Take it easy points. Mailgun almost gets it right. They've got here's an example of their Java SDK or Java API, and it's a complete example. But the trouble is, it doesn't include the import statements. Import statements are what you need in a Java program that tell the program exactly which pieces of code to use. Now, if you were to copy that into an integrated development environment, and everything happens to be configured correctly, then you'll probably get some of the correct suggestions. But if you're a newbie and your IDE isn't configured correctly, or there's some different options for you to choose different objects, then you're lost. So again, it's not a complete example. It isn't as helpful as it could be. SendGrid finally gets it right. They've got the full example in there, and there's buttons that you can use to copy it conveniently. And like any sort of software artifact, it's going to rot. Sooner or later, if you don't take care of this stuff, if you don't pay somebody to take care of this stuff and maintain it and make sure it's up to date, it's going to wind up rotting and falling out of date and not being useful. Okay, so how do you give help to developers when they're having problems with your platform? So Rackspace did an interesting experiment here. They provided a form, it's called Discuss. It's a way to basically add comment to any web page. It's really convenient. It's really good. So, if you're having a problem with an application, you need help. Boom, right below, you just type in your problem, and hopefully pretty quickly you'll actually get a response to that problem on the same page. So everything's in. You've lowered the barriers to people getting feedback about your API documentation. Great, right? The trouble is, this thing pretty like a garden of weeds. In the cases, we would handle the comments in the documentation. There were valid concerns and important problems that we had to fix, and we did. The trouble is, we didn't fix them within the comment system. We would, somebody file a ticket, submit a ticket via the Cloud Control panel, get help from support, and get the problem resolved somewhere in the background. Comment, however, doesn't get deleted. The comment winds up staying there, and it just winds up adding to the noise on the page. When developers are looking for answers, that's what they want to find. They want to find answers. They don't want a big long discussion. Right? So this becomes a big long discussion, and this is generally what folks are good at. They're good at discussions. They're not so good at answers. Developers need answers now. They want the answer to be the first thing on the top, and they want to use it and they want to move on because they've got a lot to do. So it was a worthwhile experiment, but I think we can do better. We know that provides a live chat help in the corner. This is, I think, a pretty good way to go. You need to, in some way or another, provide an actual help channel for developers because developers speak in text, right? If they're having a problem, they're generating logs, they're generating code, they're generating all sorts of these things that they want to be able to paste and send into you, or paste into a site like Pasty or GitHub.js, and help them out so they can visit that site, look at that text, and try to find out what's going on. Stuff like the phone isn't as helpful. And is just too slow. Oh, one other concept. I mean, you really do need to make sure you have somebody very technical on the other end of that actual chat. Um, People are going to snip out sales.